Okay, welcome year 8, Mr. P's here, week 11, session 2. So we did Memory Monday yesterday, now we're going to focus on reading the text. So it's going to focus on a non-fiction text today, which is a newspaper article from The Guardian, published on the 1st of March 2020. And there's a thematic link here to the story The Paradise Carpet, so we will be linking back to that in later lessons. But today's focus is about building up our understanding of the text itself. So, to begin with, it'll probably be a recap for a lot of you, particularly if you studied the Dickens unit. I'd like you to pause the video and copy down the definition and the word itself and the example, etc. So, definition: child labour, noun, the employment of children in industry or business, especially when illegal or considered exploitative. An example being the damage child labour causes to a child is both physical and mental. And that's an icon there. You see that sense of shackle to emphasize the criminality of forcing children to work and do dangerous jobs. So, think about, how is child labour an example of social injustice? Okay, pause the video now, write down the bits and pieces, the word, the definition, and the example sentence. Okay, another word that I think is an interesting word and comes up in this newspaper article is the adjective grueling. Okay, so it's an adjective and it means something that's extremely tiring and demanding. An example of how you would use it in a sentence would be the children were forced to work a grueling schedule, i.e. an extremely tiring, demanding schedule. And as an icon there, you can see that sense of the impact of such physical demands. So a task for you to think about is, what do you think is the impact of being forced to do grueling work? Pause the video now, write down the word, the definition, and the example, and think about the answer to that question. Okay, so the child labour we're focusing on today, or focused on in the article, takes place in Guatemala. And you can see here from the map that it's in Central America, just underneath Mexico. USA is just a tad further north of Mexico itself. And you can see an image there of Guatemalan children working from far too young an age, younger than many of you are. All of you, in fact. Things to note: it is illegal, against the law, for children under the age of 14 to work in Guatemala. Even though child labour is illegal, though, most of the 18 coffee workers interviewed in a particular study in November 2015 report that children do pick coffee on the plantations. And a big driver of that, of course, is poverty. So, to the text now. Here's the headline from the newspaper article. Children as young as 8 picked coffee beans on farm supplying Starbucks. And then the byline says, Nespresso also named in TV expose of labour scandal in Guatemala. There's a picture of the company Starbucks mentioned in the headline. The picture of George Clooney was the advertising face of the company Nespresso. What I want you to think about here is, why has the journalist used the youngest age of 8 in the headline? And also, why use the word scandal? And what does that suggest about what has been found out through this TV expose? Pause the video, think about it, feel free to write notes if you want to. Okay, so the youngest age of 8 emphasises how vulnerable the children are who are being forced to work, but it also evokes more sympathy for the children. But it also begins to convey how immoral the companies are for enabling and allowing such young children to be forced into work. Also, the word scandal compounds and builds on that notion, because the word scandal suggests that the child labour was happening in secret, and now it's been exposed. But it also suggests that the child labour is immoral and unacceptable. So already there's a theme here. The children are being exploited unfairly, and the companies either knew about it or aren't doing enough to tackle it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is read the article and have a look at some comprehension questions afterwards. High street coffee shop giant Starbucks has been caught up in a child labour row after an investigation revealed that children under 13 were working on farms in Guatemala that supplied the chain with its beans. Channel 4's dispatches filmed the children working 40-hour weeks in grueling conditions, picking coffee for a daily wage little more than the price of a latte. The beans were also supplied to Nespresso, owned by Nestle. Last week, actor George Clooney, the advertising face of Nespresso, praised the investigation and said he was saddened by its findings. The Dispatch's team said some of the children who worked around 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, looked as young as 8. They were paid depending upon the weight of the beans they picked, with sacks weighing up to 45 kilograms. Typically, a child would earn less than £5 a day, although sometimes it could be as low as 31p an hour. Over the course of the investigation, dispatchers visited 7 farms linked to Nespresso and 5 linked to Starbucks. Child labour was found on all the farms. A human rights lawyer who viewed some of the programme's evidence suggested both companies were in breach of international labour regulations laid down by the United Nations International Labour Organization. The conventions are very clear in that they don't want children's education to be compromised, said Oliver Holland of Solicitors Lee Day. If children are working 40 hours a week, there is no way they can also be having a proper education. These are all unsafe conditions for children, essentially, and in those conditions, children simply shouldn't be working. Dispatchers calculated that of £2.50 spent on a typical cup of coffee on the high street, the shop receives 88 pence. Staff receive 63 pence and 38 pence goes on tax. A profit of 25 pence goes to the coffee companies such as Starbucks, which has an annual global revenue of more than £20 billion and has nearly 1,000 shops in the UK alone. After other costs are accounted for, 10p is left for the coffee suppliers, of which 1p goes to the farmer. He uses a fraction of this to pay coffee pickers. Dispatches reporter Anthony Barnett shared some of the evidence with Clooney. Last week, the Hollywood star, who sits on Nespresso's Sustainability Advisory Board, said, "I was surprised and saddened to see this story. Clearly this board and this company still have work to do, and that work will be done. I would hope that this reporter will continue to investigate these conditions and report accurately if they do not improve. The check and balance of a good corporate responsibility lies not just with the company itself, but also independent journalists like Mr. Barnett to hold everyone's promise to account." Nespresso's chief executive, Wk11L2, said Nespresso has zero tolerance of child labour. It is unacceptable. Where there are claims that our high standards are not met, we act immediately. In this case, we've launched a thorough investigation to find out which farms were filmed and whether they supply Nespresso. We will not resume purchases of coffee from farms in this area until the investigation is closed. Any issues we uncover will be dealt with diligently and firm action will be taken. Starbucks also said it had a zero tolerance for child labour anywhere in our supply chain. It told dispatchers, "We've launched a full investigation into the claims brought by Channel 4, carried out in partnership with a leading third-party auditor." Starbucks has since said that its investigation confirmed we have not purchased coffee from the farms in question during the most recent harvest season. We remain concerned and are taking action due to the fact that these farms were verified in 2019 against our ethical sourcing standards, which are the most comprehensive in the coffee industry, said Michelle Burns, Starbucks global head of coffee. Barnett said, "It's great that George Clooney supports our investigation, but if he is serious about sorting out this issue, he needs to make sure Nespresso puts its money where its mouth is. It's far too easy to announce an investigation and hope supplies from these regions, but this will further punish the farmers and desperately poor families who rely on them. The reason these kids are working is that their parents and the farms they work on are not paid enough." Okay, and that's the end of the article. So a big question I want you to think about is this. What do you think the companies Starbucks and Nespresso have done wrong? Is it not knowing initially that these farms were supplying the coffee beans? Is it not doing enough to stop child labour? Is it not giving enough of their profits to these companies to ensure that the farmers and the people who work on the farms are paid a reasonable rate of salary, thus stopping the children being forced into work? Okay, some comprehension questions now. Of course, by all means, open the PowerPoint, but go back to the text, because you're probably going to want it to answer these questions accurately, okay? So the 8 questions are to help you build up your understanding of the text itself. Number 1, who exposed the child labour happening on the Guatemalan coffee farms? Number 2, which 2 companies are supplied by the coffee farms? Number 3, how many hours do the children roughly work a day and for how many days a week? Number 4, how much do the children typically get paid per day? Number 5, how have the companies breached, i.e. broken, the UN's International Labour Organization regulations? 6, why do you think the writer linked the enormous profits of Starbucks against the 1p per coffee sold that goes to the farms? Number 7, what have the companies done since the child labour has been exposed? Number 8, what does the writer think should be done in this region to help improve the child labour issue? So what I'd do now is I'd pause the video, okay? I'd go back to the text and I'd answer those questions in my book, okay? Go for it. Okay, additional task, if you have time left of your 30 minutes of working itself, go through these to further develop your understanding. So we're thinking of the end of the article here, the last few paragraphs. First of all, how did the newspaper article make you feel? You can start that sentence with the newspaper article made me feel. Secondly, what do you think is the message of the newspaper article? I think the article's message is blank because blank. And finally, how are we meant to react to this story? I think we are meant to. Just to develop that understanding, begin to think about what issues are raised and what ideas are raised in the text itself. Okay, and then finally, the answers. Okay, the answer is question number 1. The Channel 4 programme Dispatches expose what was happening here. Number 2, the companies involved, Starbucks and Nespresso. Number 3, children working for 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. Number 4, the children typically get paid less than £5 per day. Number 5, because the children are working such long hours, there is no way they could be having a proper education, which is a human right, but also the conditions and hours they're doing are unsafe for children. Number 6, to suggest that Starbucks' desire for profit is more important than making moral choices. Number 7, both companies have launched investigations and temporarily stopped buying supplies from the farms upon which child labour is happening. Number 8, the writer thinks that they should pay the adults more so the children don't have to work in order to help keep families out of desperate poverty. And that's the fundamental issue. The poor pay, forcing the children into labour to support their families. Okay, well done for your work, guys. Don't forget to send it to your teacher, submit it to your teacher via Show My Homework or me, email it to them. See you tomorrow.